Hello, my name is Mary Wise, and I'm the professor of marine science at the World Maritime University in Malmö, Sweden. Today, I'm presenting on behalf of the MESO Horizon 2020 project, where I lead the governance work package. I'll address the question, can mesopelagic fish become a safe, sustainable, and profitable food source? Here's an overview of what I will present today. First, I'll present why the mesopelagic is important. I'll present criteria for sustainable fishery and evidence from the MESO project to inform decisions about the potential for opening a fishery in the mesopelagic. These are the two species that were the focus of the MESO mesopelagic project. They're very small, but they're among the most abundant and widespread species of fish in the ocean. This is Benthosema glaciale, the glacier lanternfish, and Maurolycus muelleri, Mueller's pearl side. There are many fish to be found in the mesopelagic. It's been estimated that between 1 and 10 billion metric tons of biomass are in the mesopelagic zone. However, there's a lot of uncertainty in space and time where it's concentrated. We do know that there's clearly more fish in the mesopelagic than in all capture fisheries combined, and also more biomass. It's the most biologically productive community that we know. The two is important to the marine food web, and they feed many top predators. This food web that they are embedded within, though, is also very, very poorly known. It's a very poorly known ecosystem, the mesopelagic. The predators that feed in the mesopelagic include things like marine mammals, including whales, also tuna. There are also sharks, and also some commercial fish such as blue whiting. I mentioned that the mesopelagic is poorly known. It's been estimated that there are over 1 million undescribed species to be found in the mesopelagic. Here's a picture of some of those we do know about, though. And you can see there's a very diverse ecosystem. The mesopelagic is also very important for stabilizing our climate. The way that this is because the mesopelagic community is highly dynamic. Many, but not all, of the organisms in the mesopelagic zone migrate up and down the water column every day. They swim up to the surface at nighttime to feed in the productive euphotic zone. That's very productive. And then, but then they hide during the daytime by diving down to the ocean's depths. And then they dive down in order to escape predation by visual predators. This migration, which is the largest migration on the planet, provides a lot of climate services. And this is because the migration of animals is transporting carbon deep down into the ocean, away from the surface. When they feed at the surface, they capture productivity, and then they transfer it down to the ocean's depth. They say, or it's been estimated, that if it were not for the migrations of animals in the mesopelagic zone, our atmospheric carbon levels would be approximately 50% higher than they currently are, 50%. Now, the mesopelagic zone is very important for the ecology of the ocean and also for regulating our climate. But it has been discussed that we open up a fishery in the mesopelagic. Now, why is that? The mesopelagic has been proposed as a potential alternative food source by providing food for aquaculture, or also products that can be developed as pet food. It's also been discussed to explore and use the mesopelagic to develop new drugs and also nutraceuticals. And also, it's been proposed to shift fisheries and fishing activities to the mesopelagic to feed aquaculture in order to release pressure on other capture fisheries. In order to open up a fishery in the mesopelagic, we have to show it needs to be sustainable. And the FAO has guidelines, recommendations for sustainable food systems. The FAO says that a sustainable food system delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the environmental, social, and economic basis to generate food security and nutrition for future generations are not compromised. So, a sustainable fishery should have a positive or neutral impact on the natural environment, should be profitable, and it should have broad-based benefits to society. In the mesopelagic project, we examined the potential for developing a sustainable fishery in the mesopelagic zone. We used science to address a number of important criteria to be considered, sustainability criteria. And also, we examined this question about the potential of opening a sustainable fishery in the mesopelagic through an ecosystem-based management lens, which is essential for assessing the sustainability of a potential fishery. We addressed questions relating to the ecology, food safety. We looked at the societal implications of such a potential fishery. We looked at the economic implications and profitability. And then also we examined whether or not it would be possible for such a fishery to be managed and governed effectively. So let's look at some of the questions, and let's start with the ecology. Do we know how much we can catch without impacting the ecology of the mesopelagic zone? And also, do we know that if we were to fish the mesopelagic, if the organisms that we would fish would be able to replace themselves? And all those organisms that could be affected by the fishing could replace themselves too. Now, we carried out a number of studies, Vassenhund et al. 2023 and 2024, and then also Spears et al., which is currently in prep, and it has been submitted as a MESO project deliverable. These studies have concluded that there are major knowledge gaps that remain about the population dynamics, population structure, and biological reference points for the two species we looked at. Mueller's pearl side and also the glacier lanternfish. We lack quite a lot of information about their basic biology still. And we don't have enough in order to establish these biological reference points in order to guide fisheries management. So in other words, for these two species we looked at, we have insufficient scientific knowledge to assess that populations in the Northeast Atlantic could replace themselves if a major fishery were to become established. Although we didn't examine the effects on the potential effects to bycatch in the mesopelagic project, it is something that we discussed and considered a lot. We still need a thorough examination of target and bycatch populations, the food web interactions that could happen if we were to undertake a fishery, and also the biodiversity impacts. But we have discussed, and it is shown by a number of other studies, that the mesopelagic layer, it is a diverse mixed layer. And that even though some nets that are used for fishing are potentially selective, and many species are good at avoiding nets in the mesopelagic, there's still a lot that we don't know about bycatch levels. We've also, through our work, discussed that we risk catching undescribed species with unknown population consequences. So this is what we have to say about bycatch. There are a lot of uncertainties, and we don't know what other non-target species could be affected if we were to undertake an industrialized fishing activity for the two species we looked at in the MESO project. So thus, to put it simply, we still don't know if an industrial scale fishery could avoid negative impacts on ecosystem functions, harmful ecological changes in the food chain, and no more than a negligible impact on any potentially threatened, endangered, or protected species. Many of the top predators that do feed in the mesopelagic zone are important for food webs and also and are important for our commercial fisheries, and also some of them do have endangered or protected status. We examined in the MESO project if it would be safe if food or products harvested, or if biomass harvested from the mesopelagic could be potentially developed as products that would be safe for the human food chain. And that also includes via aquaculture. So MESO analyzed the nutrient composition and contaminant load in 6 widespread mesopelagic species that included those 2 target species, or 2 species that were the main focus of MESO, Benthesema glaciale and Maurolycus murali. Now, considering the current legislation and nutrition levels for the EU, the mesopelagic fish species investigated do have potential as a food and feed ingredient. However, there are some uncertainties that we should consider. For example, that the species and the samples that we studied were only from the Norwegian waters, and that the spatial and temporal variation in contaminants still remains unknown. So if there are big fluctuations over time, or to be found, or if there were big differences between the samples we looked at in Norway and other parts of the world, we don't know about the we can't say much about the contaminant levels outside those samples we looked at. And also, though the levels of most contaminants that we looked at are safe for the human food chain according to EU legislation, we don't know about PFAS and other contaminant levels that are becoming more and more of concern for testing for food safety. In the MESO project, we examined whether or not it would be profitable to open a mesopelagic fishery today. And the answer, very simply, is it would not be profitable to open up a mesopelagic fishery today. There's currently no profitable market. Other protein sources are simply much cheaper today. In order to go into business for a mesopelagic fishery, this would require major investment to support specialized vessels, gear, and crew. For example, onboard refrigeration is limited to only 5 days. And so we would need some sort of onboard processing facilities in order to support a mesopelagic fishery if the vessels were to be out longer than 5 days. A mesopelagic fishery would only be economically viable if catch rates or prices were very, very high. And in fact, the estimates that our studies have shown is that the prices would need to be higher than 1.6 euro per kilo. And that's nearly twice the price of commercial fish that are currently being caught that have a similar fat content. The cost of climate impacts are also likely to exceed today's economic net benefits in those studies that we've carried out that considered the social cost of carbon, or the cost of potential impact or the cost of potential climate damage that could be incurred from fishing in the mesopelagic zone. We also examined the important question of whether or not the mesopelagic could be governed and managed effectively. A sustainable fishery must be able to be governed and managed effectively. What our studies have shown, and this is looking at the geographic distributions of the species and where the species are concentrated, distributed, and how their biomass is distributed, shows that the species so far are sparse And their seasonal and vertical migrations are difficult to track. Even though some places may be more highly concentrated than others, they're in general quite sparse. There's also a lot of great spatial uncertainties, and these translate, and these spatial uncertainties, where are the fish concentrated, where are they less concentrated, where are they hard to find. This translates into uncertainties in the exploitation potential. And so this also has implications for the governance and also decisions that could relate to opening up potential fishery and how it could be monitored. We found that there are distinct spatial distributions for our two different species across the different management zones. And this comes from looking at analyses of our samples with the CPUDIN model. And so for each of the species we looked at, so on the left we have Benthesema, and on the right we have Maurolycus. We found that in both cases, most of the biomass is more highly concentrated in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So that means that a great deal of the biomass is outside, is in the high seas, and it's outside national waters. We also found, though, that there is a great deal of biomass within national waters too, and so that means that some countries would have the potential to govern and manage the species inside their waters. But we should also consider dynamics and what's happening in areas beyond national jurisdiction in the high seas. And because most of the biomass is beyond national jurisdiction. We also carried out a study looking at policy documents supporting the main 10 international biodiversity, climate, and fisheries agreements. Our policy analysis, showed that there's a dearth of policies protecting the mesopelagic zone and the species that are found within them, as well as the ecosystem services that we find within the mesopelagic zone. The policies that we have are also highly siloed, so it's very difficult to use the climate policies to support the protection of fish biodiversity or fish biomass, for example. So the question about whether or not we can govern and manage the mesopelagic zone depends very much on where we are. And the RFMOs could potentially play a very important role here. RFMOs are regional fisheries management organizations. The new BBNJ agreement in the high seas, the new high seas treaty, considers carbon cycling in its general principles. And this could have implications for area-based management and environmental assessment. So this means that we might potentially be able to consider within the new BBNJ agreement whether or not it's possible to protect mesopelagic fish and their ecosystem services, their carbon cycling services in the high seas through instruments like the area-based management tools and environmental assessment that impact assessment that the BBNJ offers. So the BBNJ, could potentially protect 60% of the world's oceans, but it remains to be ratified. And we also don't know about a lot about its implementation. So there are a lot of uncertainties about how to govern and manage the mesopelagic zone in national waters, but then also out on the high seas. We examined the question of would a mesopelagic fishery be accepted by the public? Amanda Shatterberg's PhD work explored this question, and she documented that the mesopelagic is currently poorly understood by the public. However, the acceptance of a potential mesopelagic fishery would depend on various ecological and climatic risks and the distribution of positive and negative impacts that, that fishing could have on the mesopelagic. Currently, she found that scientists have quite a lot of influence on how the fishery would be understood. And so they play a very, very important role in how the public understands the mesopelagic zone. Her work also concluded too with a paper that's been submitted that it may be difficult to achieve social acceptance of a mesopelagic fish harvest. So in conclusion, the prospect of a mesopelagic fishery hopes for opportunities for food security, for employment and income, but also carries substantial economic, ecological, and societal risks. A mesopelagic fishery is currently not profitable, and it may not be accepted by the public if it were to open. We also show and conclude from the MESO project that a precautionary approach to management is warranted because of the wide uncertainties concerning the potential ecosystem, climate, and biodiversity impacts of a fishery, the lack of biological reference points to support management. So we don't know if the populations of Maurolicus and Benthesema would be able to replace themselves if we were to harvest them. And also because of the limited possibilities for management and effective governance in the near term in many parts of the world. So with that, I'd like to share the references used to support this brief. So on bycatch, cost of climate change, on governance, food safety, the ecology, and on profitability. With that, I'll say thank you to the mesopelagic for all of the fish, and thank you for the to the European Commission for funding this work, and to all of our collaborators for the mesopelagic project.